Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
In professional networking, one of the things we talk about all the time is, we say it, know, like, trust. You hear it, know, like, trust. People need to know you, they need to like you, and they need to trust you before they'll do business with you, before they'll refer you, before they'll associate with you on any sort of meaningful basis. Now, I've always looked at those things as kind of sequential, right? You need to know somebody before you can determine whether you like them or not. And it's possible to know someone and determine, you know what, I don't really like that person. I think we can all stop and think of people in our lives who fall into that category. And that's fine, right? That's fine. We don't need to like everybody. And I guess stepping back, if you don't know somebody, then you really can't even get to that point of making decisions. So you need to know people, you need to like them, and then you need to trust them. And it's entirely possible to go to know and like somebody and not necessarily trust them. I've talked about this from time to time. I'm not sure I shared the story here, but my office. My office is a house that's converted into office space. It's kind of in a commercial district. The person living next to it was the last residence on the street. It was the retired janitor of the local school, and his son moved back in when I was kind of rehabbing things and helped me out. Well, the son had been released from prison. The son was in and out of jail, and they weren't violent crimes or anything like that, but passing bad checks, just stuff like that, just stupid stuff. And so, but he was very good. He was certainly reliable in helping me. But at one point he started a handyman business, and I really, I had put flyers together for him, but I wasn't going to vouch for him, by referring him, because, while I knew him and liked the work he did, I didn't really trust him beyond, hey, we need to put drywall up here. So it's possible to be known but not liked, and it's possible to be known and liked and not trusted. So anyhow, trust is, so it's sequential, right? You need all three of those things. So let's talk about trust. Let's pick on trust here for a little bit. There was a couple of studies that came out, and they seem in contradiction to one another, but they're really not. One study determined that if you are a lower class, if you're poor, you are less trustworthy. I'm not saying you are not trustworthy, perceived as being less trustworthy than somebody who's well-to-do. It's just, that's what the science shows, that if, you're somebody who has kind of made it, you're a partner in a major law firm, you're a CEO, you're a government official, somebody, I'm not saying necessarily rich, but if you're somebody who is really, really struggling, you're not perceived as being as trustworthy as somebody who has made it. Now, you can kind of pick away at all of that and say, okay, it kind of makes sense that, there's a reason why somebody is not doing as well. There's something there that gives people pause to say, you know what, I know I like that person, I'm not sure that I trust them. They haven't been able to do what they need to do to advance themselves, however you might want to see that. And for that reason, I'm not sure of that person. I'm not sure I trust them. Again, it doesn't mean they're not trustworthy. It just means that there is a perception that they're not as trustworthy as somebody who has made it. I don't think that that's necessarily surprising as to how we might be I mean, it's prejudicial. It might be somebody who, it's entirely possible that there's somebody out there who has done very well for themselves and is not trustworthy. Bernie Madoff, for example. And there's a perfect example of somebody who has done very well. He was worth billions of dollars, and he built people out of billions of dollars. So I'm not saying this is a matter of perception and how people are perceived. And part of the reason why Bernie Madoff was able to do the things that he was able to do is because people trusted him, because people saw that, okay, this guy has made it. He's he's worth millions. He's done well for these people. I'm going to trust him, and hence he was able to build people out of billions of dollars. I don't even know the untold amount of money that he was able to get away with, if you will. Well, he didn't get away with it. He's languishing in prison, and we don't need to go there. But anyhow, I just want to kind of point that out. Is I'm talking about perception. I'm not talking about what people actually are. There are some people out there who don't have a whole lot in life, but they're really trustworthy. I mean, they absolutely are. But for somebody who doesn't know them, you know, the perception's not there. So all things being equal, right? All things being equal, somebody who has done better for themselves is going to be perceived as being more trustworthy than somebody who hasn't. Again, I don't know if there's anything shocking with respect to any of that. Here's the other study that I thought was really interesting. And when I read these two back to back, I was kind of like, wait a minute, these things are in total conflict with one another. But the more I thought about it, they're not. And what the second study went on to say is that if you grew up privileged, you are perceived as being less trustworthy than somebody who grew up in a lower class. All right? So if you grew up privileged and you're still doing really, really well, you're not as trusted as again, this is perception, right? These are people's perceptions. You are not as perceived as being as trustworthy as somebody who grew up poor, started poor, and has made something themselves. And I'm not saying that they're, Elon Musk level wealth or anything like that, but somebody who, started at in a trailer park, and now has worked their way up and has these, has a beautiful home. Has really made something of themselves. I was watching a program on YouTube yesterday about a CEO whose both his parents died by the time he was 12, and he was pretty much too much of his life was left to his own devices, and he ended up going and running 7-Eleven and Blockbuster Video. Right? I could look his name up. I didn't. But anyhow, he started with meager beginnings, and so somebody like that is a whole lot more trustworthy than somebody who started with lots of money and still has lots of money, if that makes sense. Again, it's perception. It's how people perceive it. So it kind of makes sense, if you will, because if you're somebody who has always had lots of things going for you, the fact that you still have lots of things going for you, it's kind of like, okay, what's the big deal? You really haven't done anything. It's easy to have $1 million if you start with $950,000, but to have $1 million and start with $95, well, they've done something right. They've done something right. And so I find this all very interesting because I noticed that a lot of people, I don't want to say influencers, but people who are out there and they're, coaches and consultants, the people who, people are always talking about where they've come from, and there's more credibility. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. but I think people try and bank on this. There's more credibility in essentially saying, you know what, um, I I struggled and here I am now, right? I I went through a bankruptcy. I went through this, and there's people. There's a perception of trust for people who have made it, overcoming difficult circumstances, whatever it might be. The person out there, who is 150 pounds, but 2 years ago was 350 pounds, has more credibility, again, right or wrong, than the person who was always just 150 pounds. The person who's worth $1 million and always was worth $1 million has less credibility than the person who started with $95 and made their way up to $1 million. You really can't control your past. Your past is your past. I guess what I take away from this is if you started with a lot, I'd be real quiet about that. I'd be quiet about that, especially if you're trying to build trust. I'm not suggesting that you lie, but I don't think you lean into that. You spent your summers at the Hamptons every year. I'm not talking about the Hampton Inn. I'm talking about in Long Island, the Hamptons, hanging with the rich and the famous. I would be careful about that because, and that wasn't me. I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we weren't poor. We weren't rich either. But you need to be careful as to understanding. Obviously, if you're down on your luck right now, you need to do what you can to try and I don't say mask it. I'm not talking about lying it, but I wouldn't lean into it. I don't think people don't hey, I'm down on my luck. I'm poor. I need help. People are empathetic to that, but they're not necessarily trusting of that. Or they don't necessarily. There's a perception of a lack of trust, so you're going to need to work a little harder. If you've overcome things, didn't have a lot of money, paid my way through school, kind of thing. I think that's worth leaning into because that helps develop credibility. So again, people need to know us, they need to like us, and they need to trust us. And when it comes to building trust, where you come from matters. Where you come from matters. So if you've come from a lot and you still have a lot, you're not going to be perceived as being as trustworthy as somebody who has started with very little and made something of themselves.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.